Okay, good morning. Today I'm going to go over your traditional applications for either paint, right here, or spray paint, okay, or a stain, or just what's called a clear polyurethane, which is just a protective coat over the wood. Those are your standard applications. I'm not going to go into the differences and what they are, but you can either apply these with a paintbrush or a rag. Those are typical applications. For paint, you normally use a paintbrush. These are spray-ons, and stain you can either do with a brush or a rag. I typically do a rag, but that's up to you and what you have. I would have some tape here ready for taping, whether you're going to do some custom paint job or if you want to make sure that it doesn't drip into certain areas. Okay, a stain I typically like to stir with a clean stir stick. I don't like to shake it, it creates some bubbles in there. Paint, on the other hand, you can shake or stir. I typically shake it. Any spray device, make sure you read the instructions on the back, but typically you're shaking those to stir those up. So those are the preps on those. Again, before you do this, make sure you're in an area that has enough air so it's ventilated. These all put off some form of toxic smell, so you want to have some fresh air. Put on some clothes that you don't mind if they get dirty, and then be in a space that if something's spilled, it's not going to damage your carpet or anything else. I always like to have a wet rag on hand in order to clean this up. I would then, once you have those, the first thing is to read the instructions. Okay? So the first thing I like to do is look at what the cleanup is. Hopefully most of this is cleaned up with water. Okay? If your cleanup requires some form of chemical such as a mineral spirits, paint thinner, something like that, now you're dealing with an oil-based versus a water-based. Most paint these days is water-based, so all you have to do to clean out a brush is go rinse it under your sink under water. If you got it on your clothes, you can rinse it off with water. Okay? Then there's other things that are going to be what's an oil-based. In order to clean up an oil base, then what you're doing is cleaning that with a chemical. So try to do water-based if you can. Okay? So now we're ready to paint or stain. Now I'm going to show you both, but I want to make sure is that you have sanded everything perfectly to 220 grit. And the thing that most people forget and don't sand is these little places, because they didn't wipe the let me focus in on here. They didn't wipe the glue. So if you look right here on this joint right here, or on this joint right here, you're going to see that dark spot there. That is dried glue that should have been wiped up when this was glued together. It was not wiped, and then it was not sanded. So what I'm going to show you is when you stain this, the stain is not actually going to change the color of the area where the glue is. The reason for that is that glue closes the pores of the wood, and therefore the stain can't penetrate it. If you're using paint, it's not as big of a deal because it's actually covering the surface of the material versus the stain, which is penetrating into the material. Okay, paint, you normally would use a primer like the video I showed you the other day. Yes, you would use a primer for this. It's not critical for you to use a primer as long as you do 1 or 2 coats, and we'll go over that. So I want to start with the stain. Okay, so when you have a stain, what you need to do, take the bottle off of the top lid. So you're going to get a flathead screwdriver, and then what you're going to do is put here, and you're going to pry this up. Now this one is closed. Let's see if we can get this thing out of here. There we go. So I'm just prying this up. If you want to wear gloves, you can. It's not a bad idea. Again, some of this has some pretty strong smells to it. Okay, and here's the inside of our stain. Now, remember, I'm going to stir this. Get my stir stick, make sure it's clean, nothing's on it. Stir that up. You'll notice really quick that smell that's going to come off of there. Now, if you want to kind of see what the stain is going to do, I would do it on some test pieces. So stain is you're going to let it sit there for about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how dark you want it. And then what you get to is you get a rag and you actually wipe the extra off. Okay, so that is what color this stain would be. It's right here. So what I want to do, now that we have it stirred, I'm going to take my rag, find somewhat of a clean spot. I'm going to bottle it up here, dip it in there. Okay, and what I'm trying to do is show you how that this will do different colors on that glue spot. So I'm going to then apply it right here. You're just putting it all, spreading it all over. Okay. Let it, you can kind of rub it in there. Now again, depending on how long you let that sit is going to determine how much that is saturated into the wood pores and how much that's going to get it dark. So if I wipe it right now, it's going to be lighter than if I let it set for 5-10 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to say I'm done with that, and I'm going to directly, immediately, careful where you put your open can so you don't put it on the ground, trip over it, or somebody gets into it. You want to make sure that these are airtight when you seal it up. Okay, so you're going to pound that over, and that is generally the stain. Now I'm only going to let this sit, so now I'm going to get the clean part of my rag, not this part, and I'm going to wipe this off. Now, there is my stain. Now what I want to do is I want to show you guys right here. If we look here, we have several different colors. Okay? I'm actually going to zoom in on this. Okay, so here's our several colors. Right here, you'll see this is lighter. That's where the glue was. You can see glue here, glue was here, glue was here. Okay? That's all places that have to be sanded. Okay? So really sand, and make sure, even to do better, is that you wipe that again when the glue's wet. Now you'll notice this part right here and this part right here is really dark. And the reason that's really dark is because this is called end grain. If you look at the board here, this ends right here. Well, this is all open pores right here on the wood, so it just sucks up that stain and it gets darker. Okay, this is the face grain of a board, and it doesn't have as many pores and doesn't suck up that juice as much. Okay, you can kind of see right here how this starts to go down into the pores of that board. So that's stain. Now typically you would stain, let that dry. If you want to do another coat, you can to make it darker. You don't have to. And then you would normally take the poly or some kind of clear coating to put over the stain to protect it. You don't have to, but you can. Okay? So that is the general basic stain. Now that is a manufactured stain. There are, as I'm going to show you, there's videos of how you can make your own stain, and I'll put those videos in the link. Now, spray paint, really easy. I'm not even going to show you that. Most of you know how to do that. The thing I would say, number one, shake it really well. Number two, make sure that that nozzle's spraying away from you. Okay? Don't spray it towards your face. And number three, You don't want to get really close. You want to be about 6 inches away, and you just do light sprays, small coats. So don't just sit in one spot and spray that and let it puddle up. It'll create runs. You want to stand back and you want to do strokes. So let me zoom out here. So if I was going to spray paint this, I'm doing strokes here, stroke here, stroke here, stroke here, back and forth. Let it cover, takes about 30 minutes to dry, then do another coat. Okay? You can sand with 320 or 220 between each coat. Make sure you're wiping away any dust before you spray another coat. Now, let's get to painting. I'm going to shake my can here, because we can shake this up. Okay, same thing. Shake it for about a minute. Same thing, we're going to open the lid here. Read the directions again before you do these, please. Oh, we got a fun red here. Okay, now if you don't have an actual paintbrush, you can use a little brush that you might use for actual painting on an acrylic board or at your house for an art project. That's totally fine. Okay, again, make sure your sanding is complete, all the dust and particles are away. Then you're going to take your paintbrush, dip just a little bit, go across the side here, and you have just a little bit of paint on the end. And now I'm just going to paint the side here. I like to put paint on going with the grain. So I need a little bit more. Now you don't normally want to mix paint and stain, but again, this is your project. You'll notice that the paint doesn't really stick here over the stain. Okay, and now right here, you want to pay attention. This is called a run. Okay, a run is when you get too much paint in one area here. Okay, so you don't want blobs of paint. So if I put this here, okay, and I was going to paint here, I don't want to just let that sit right there. I want to spread that out so it's nice and flat. So when I put my next layer on, it doesn't have any of those bumps or blobs or runs of paint. So I get in there and I go all the directions. And now I would wait, again, read the instructions, but I would wait about an hour at least to see if this dries. Once it's dry, you can put your second coat on if you want. You don't have to. And then you don't need any kind of polyurethane or protection over a paint. Okay, it's got all the stuff that you need. Now, very important, once you're done with a paintbrush, number one, go and clean it. Okay, if you let the paint dry on a paintbrush, it will destroy your paintbrush. You can't use it again. So when you're done, go and put it away. If you're gonna wait a little bit, like maybe a coat, sometimes what I'll do is I'll get a paper towel and I'll wet it really damp and I'll put it around the paintbrush to keep that paint moist. But if you just let it dry, it's gonna ruin your paintbrush. Then the next thing is, make sure, again, just like the stain, that you seal your paint really well. And there you go. Now, last thing for the basics of stain and paint is masking off something. Put these boards down so it doesn't get all over my table. Let's say I wanted to do a stripe across here. So what you can do is you have your tape And let's say I wanted to do, I painted this all one color, and then I wanted to do a custom little stripe right here over the red paint. Well, now I could get a white colored paint, make sure all the debris, and I could paint a white strip right over that. Before you put tape over paint, make sure it's really dry, or when you peel it up, it's going to peel the paint. Okay? But you could create a little stripe there and start customizing your paint job. So really important here is ventilated area, read the instructions, put on clothes and work in an area that if something spills, you're not going to have a really big disaster on your hands. Again, look for the video on homemade stains, but if you have your own paint or want to go get your own paint and stain, there are some of your options. Have fun. I look forward to seeing your projects.